Greetings to our viewers around the world. Today we're going to discuss the deepening political crisis in Ethiopia. For the last 3 years, now approaching its fourth, the country has been in turmoil, in political, economic, and multidimensional crisis. It's now in the throes of a deepening crisis. And to discuss the situation, I am joined by Dr. Tsegeye from the University of Melbourne in Australia, and Jawar Mohammed, Executive Director of the Oromo Media Network. Greetings, Dr. Tsegeye. How is it in Melbourne?
Good. Thanks, Ezkeil. Thanks for having me.
And Jawar?
It's getting cold here in Minneapolis, but no snow yet.
All right. It's getting cold in Ethiopia as well, politically speaking. The Ethiopian political system is really crumbling, to use the word that the political analyst Rene Laford used. It's a multi-dimensional crisis, especially, more importantly, the crisis of legitimacy. And this is not really an assessment of the opposition, but it is also an assessment of the leading figures in Ethiopia, particularly the military and the security personnel. Last week, the National Security Council, which was defunct for some time, was reconstituted, and they issued this document assessing the state of affairs in Ethiopia. I know that you have seen and read and assessed and reflected on this document. So let me ask you, to begin with you, Dr. Tsegeye in Melbourne. How did you see the document?
Oh, yes, the National Security Plan issued by the National Security Council a week ago seems to have a very comprehensive assessment of the security situation in the country, and in a very strange twist of gesture on the part of the Ethiopian government, it seems to be a very transparent, a very honest document about the current realities in the country. I think, as you have seen, the document has about 26, 27 pages. And what it does is, in its content, to do a situation analysis, to identify specific tasks that need to be taken in order to intervene in this crisis situation and arrest the crisis somehow, and to set out some implementation guidelines. And in the end, it has an evaluation or a monetary mechanism where it also puts down a timeline for implementing. And in its assessment of the situation, it looks at a number of situations at the moment. And one of the things that it says is that there is a huge harm created on the population. There is obviously they wouldn't use it. They don't use these terms, but they talk about human insecurity in many ways. They talks about displacement. Very interestingly, it even explicitly talks about genocide in some places. It talks about atrocities happening in various places. It talks about the threat to movement of people and goods, and it also mentions nameless acts of terrorism. It just didn't want to name the actors, but it talks about nameless terrorist activities. Apart from that, it identifies a number of other crisis situations. It also talks about the fact that the economy is hurting. It says that the youth is mobilized for conflict rather than for development activities. It talks about the movement of money, the lack of foreign currency, and even the smuggling in illicit ways of foreign currency, and mobilization of the youth for protests, flight or shortage of commodities, and an extensive capital flight, and decline in investment, decline in tourism, and damage to properties, price hikes, contraband, illicit trade, etc. Now that is telling us extensively and in a very interesting detail about how the economy is hurting. And thirdly, it talks about the breakdown in rule of law. And it talks about the fact that there is no rule of law at the moment. There is a threat to the constitutional order. It even mentions specific things in here, that there is riots everywhere, that terrorist groups such as OLF and Gimbot 7, Sabat, and protesters are acting in different ways, and then the protesters are unpunished. Unwanted flags are seen in the horizon, it says, and after that it talks about how the image of Ethiopia is tarnished, how I think the Ethiopia on the rise meme is now obviously put out as a mere facade. And it also mentions the fact that there are conflicts unabated in different places, conflicts that threaten national and regional security situations. And very honestly, and this is very uncharacteristic of the Ethiopian government, there is a heightened fear among people, it says, and there is a limited movement, freedom of movement. And of course, they are talking about freedom of mainly commodities across regions, such as the chat trade in the East, and so on and so forth. And ultimately, it talks about the problem of leadership and the slow reform process that is going on within the political party and the government, and of course, the patent threat to the constitutional order, and fear, and the operation of various forms of various elements, anti-peace elements, it says, anti-peace elements in various places. One of the interesting things it does is that it kind of brings all the problems back to the crisis in leadership. And it points out that the leadership is central to the mismanagement, so to say, of these problems. One of the things that it doesn't say, however, is that the security threat, where it comes from, it blames the leadership in gloss, but it doesn't specify where exactly the problem lies. The reason it does that is, I think, to not to do name calling, so that their motive becomes explicit and where they are heading will be known from the start. So that's what it does. It is very, very disarmingly transparent, very open, very candid, and for the first time, I think the Ethiopian government is describing its situation in a very bleak manner, and in such a way that they kind of make it necessary for intervene through security measures, through militarized measures. And it looks like they are now admitting that this is the end of politics and the start of military intervention.
Okay, we'll get to that analysis. But Jawar, how do you see it? What's your take on the document and the fact that this is a really an unprecedentedly transparent way to deal with Ethiopia's problems?
Because they are facing the unprecedented level of crisis. As a guy said, when I first saw the document, I was impressed how forthcoming and how honest it was. It admits that the country is plunging from crisis to crisis, that protest and is non-stop, and it doesn't show any sign of stopping. This is in contrast to what they were saying last year. After the state of emergency, they said we have crushed it, everything is under control, the Oromo story is over. I remember they sent diplomats all over Europe and America, assuring their foreign supporters, foreign governments and investors that everything is under normal. And well, they were right in their assessment, because they thought after killing some 3,000 people, imprisoning probably 100,000 people, and putting all leaders they can identify in jail, they would have thought that everything is under control. But in this document, what you see is a candid admission that the strategy, the use of force did not work. They also admit that the economy is in shambles. The economy is in a serious crisis. The foreign direct investment is drying up. The tourism sector is dying. Trade volume inside the country is dying. The foreign currency situation is dying, and foreign governments are stopping to provide them aid and loan. And it's really, it's not something you expect from that government. So they admit that there is multifaceted crisis feeding each other off. when they move to the cause, and again, you see a new revelation, a new approach, where they say, in the past, they will just say, oh, these are extremist elements here and there, supported by foreign elements, the usual Eritrea, Egypt. Here you find Eritrea, Egypt mentioned like a couple of times. But again and again, they repeat that this is a political problem. This is, orchestrated, organized from inside the country, not only inside the country, from inside the ruling party. It admits and it repeats again and again, saying that, whether they call them, rent seekers, corrupts, aligning themselves with the popular demand, hijacking the popular demand, the legitimate popular demand, to hide and to avoid legal responsibility and so on and so on. So it admits there is a serious political crisis, almost paralysis. It also admits that the issue is internal. When it comes to solution, that's where they go back to where they always are. The solution they are proposing is a heavy security crackdown, securitization. And how do they rationalize? They say, look, we are in deep political problem. Yes, we need political solution. But the current deteriorating security situation does not allow for finding a political solution. Therefore, we must control the security situation to facilitate conditions for political solution. So they propose establishment of command posts at different levels. That's what they propose. But there's something that's not on the document. What happened in the preceding weeks? They attempted, before they produced this document, they wanted a situation, particularly in Oromo, that would justify this document. As you remember, they attempted to instigate nationwide rallies and violence, attack on communal violence and all kind of stuff, which we, the activist community inside the country and outside the country opposed, and with the help of elders controlled. They wanted a severe, very clear sign of danger, imminent danger, that would justify this kind of approach. Not only that, I think about 2 weeks before this document was tabled, they convinced the Prime Minister to set up a command post. But that command post was opposed by the EPRDF Executive Committee, particularly by the OPDOs and some of the BRN as well as other parties. That command post was stopped. It was halted. Then they called a National Security Council. But here is the trick. The National Security Council has 7 people, including the Prime Minister, Chief of Staff, and others. But here they didn't do that kind of meeting. They called all kind of security agencies, different branches of the police, different branches of the military, different branches of the intelligence, and of course, regional police chiefs and regional presidents. So the regional presidents and security officials are very, very tiny minority voice in this almost 200, 300 people gathering. It's actually not a Security Council meeting in a sense. It's a meeting of everybody who is involved in security. Why did they do that? They wanted to dwarf, silence people like Lamma from the regional government, people like Gaddu. They wanted to silence them. They wanted to make them voice of minority. From those participators, I hear that these individuals, the police chief, the police investigators, the military generals, different people who came were prepared. They were ready to attack, to blame regional administrations. So what do we conclude from this? Really, this document says is it wants to scare the officials. It wants to terrify them into saying, you have lost control of the politics. The security situation is deteriorating. And guess what? You are responsible either by failing to find a political solution or by being part of the problem by conspiring with outside elements. Therefore, we, the guys with the guns, we are going to come. We are going to whip you and the population into shape and force you to take to find political solution. This is a very classic approach the military does. Military and intelligence, every time they want to step into a political arena, they always claim the security situation is deteriorating, national unity is in jeopardy, national security is in trouble, the country is about to disintegrate, there is going to be ethnic and communal strife. Therefore, we are going to act to save the country because the political order, the political elites are unwilling or unable to find a solution. That's what they did. And in short, that's what they did last week in Zimbabwe. And that's what the military has done almost every time before they intervened in a state coup d'etat or took over the country. So this is a document really that the generals are preparing to step in. Why do they want to step in? Is this security situation real? We can discuss later on, but I think that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah, that's really good. And I just want to follow on what Jawar was saying, that they were trying to create a situation that would precipitate or legitimize a military intervention in politics. But in the process, what it looks like is that they're undermining the state institutions and the hierarchy of authority in the country to, again, create a situation, a crisis situation, which would make a the security so bad that people would say, come and take over, and security is more important than liberty or other great goods in life. But I really want you to remain focused on this idea of why now. That is, this is important. See, this is not the government that is used to being transparent and honest in its assessment. Is this document just something that was leaked? Why is it so important, Dr. Tsegeye, that this government, in an unprecedented manner, uncharacteristic of this government, that they had to really come to grips with the reality and put out this document? Why do you think that was their motive? So that you can really stress on this idea of what the intention behind this document is. As we say that we know what it is.
Right. It's very, as I said, it's a very transparent document, and it sets out its objectives as, let me see, the objective, it says, is the it sets the objectives very clearly, and says that because there is a lot of crisis happening, there must be someone who takes responsibility. And it very clearly says a political solution alone can bring about a lasting peace and a lasting restored peace, law and order, and so on and so forth. The solution to the constitutional crisis, the threat of constitutional crisis we have is, of course, it says, a political solution. However, it says, in the here and now, we need to take concrete action. And that concrete action, it doesn't say why that's happening. Of course, it talks about the freedom of movement that is curtailed, the freezing of movement of commodities, or illicit movement of commodities and weapons and foreign currency, etc., is mentioned. And that is, of course, tarnishing the national image, threatening national and regional security situation, and so on and so forth. Now, why is it that they needed to take concrete actions? The reason they needed to take concrete action is to create an enabling situation to suppress the protest altogether, B, to suppress the political leadership, especially in Oromia and in the Amhara region, who somehow are trying to align themselves with the popular demands, the popular protests. There is some populist rhetoric flourishing around the leadership in OPDO and ANDM. Even more than that, there is this alliance between the two groups. The visit of the Lemma government and the Abagadas and Oromo artists and so on. A cohort of a large body actually moved to Bardar, and the reception was very warm, and all that seems to have threatened the key actors, the hitherto key actors in the EPRDF coalition, which is mainly the TPLF actors. Now, because they feel threatened now, because they think that they are stepping out of the usual control of the TPLF, they needed to have a handle on the whole thing, and they wanted to get back into the game of making sure that the OPDO and the NDM are under the control and domination of TPLF. In order to be able to do that, they needed to say that the problem is the problem of leadership. The problem is the problem of corruption. The problem is the problem of a slow reform that could have enhanced good governance but couldn't. The problem is the issue of rent seeking. So this rent seeking, corrupt, not reforming, unreforming, etc. leadership must be now looked at closely. So what do? We do specific activities. We do specific activities such as deploying the army, controlling the lines and doing patrols, as Jawar just indicated, securitizing the whole political problem, controlling the lines, the roads and the highways, and patrolling them 24 hours, it says, 24 hours, and collaborate with the regional local elders to bring peace and so on and so forth. And by doing that, to undermine, as you also hinted at earlier on, all political institutions, all possibly legitimate political institutions have to be either neglected or bypassed. Why? Because they are filled and manned by corrupt politicians, corrupt rent-seeking politicians. So why are they doing this? Number one, they wanted to have a handle over the security situation. They wanted to somehow come back to the game and control the whole thing. Then, after getting a relative stability, they wanted to evaluate, to engage in what EPRDF is best at, in what TPLF is good at, which is to go into that session, this endless sessions of evaluation and purging of the recalcitrant politicians. And then after a while, they retrench themselves by appointing their own clients who are willing to be patronized by these kind of politicians. So that is, they just wanted to have a semblance of stability, after which they will have a political regrouping where they will do evaluation and purging of unwanted rent-seeking officials, and then they're back in control and then continue to rule. Now, one thing they should understand now is that the population has a heightened awakening. This awakened public is not going to be afraid of military presence and go back home without getting their demands properly responded to, properly addressed. So they have used all military force so far. They have used all security solutions, but people haven't gone back to work, the economy didn't kick back into life, and so on and so forth. So what are they threatened with in particular when they are trying to undermine or bypass the basic political and democratic institutions such as the parliament? They are threatened by the OPDO-ANDM alliance, which might take over, they take their own seats in parliament seriously and might reconstitute government and might probably go into a slow kind of transition into what looks like a democracy. And that, of course, is naturally anathema to the TPLF regime. It is instinctively anti-democratic. And every movement towards democratic alliance is a threat to them. And that's what they are trying to fight back through this National Security Council, National Security Plan.
I'm sure Jawar has more to say on this one, but let me try to summarize what you guys have said on the assessment itself. I think basically what the picture that you're painting, you both are painting, is that there is a collapse of authority in the country, that there is really a lack of visible, authoritative, legitimate, and widely acceptable leadership. There is really no clear, recognized seat of decision-making in the country. There are so many competing factions in the system. The second is the security crisis. What you just talked about is the security crisis, which is that there is an increasing reliance on the coercive apparatus of the state rather than the democratic and civil side of the institutions. And this is eroding the effectiveness and the legitimacy of the formal institutions, as you just said, Tsegeye. The other thing is because of the lack of legitimacy, there is also an administrative paralysis, that there is really no coherence to both the state and past party structure. And that is really important. So it is in this situation that what seems to be cohesive at the moment is trying to usurp power, to arrogate power to themselves, to create that situation and then take over power. There is definitely the thing that you just said, which is out of their own control, is the economic slowdown. It's not, in fact, a slowdown, it's a downward spiral if you look at all sectors of economic performance. In the first place, the economy is basically dominated by the oligarchy and the party businesses. But what is left of it is experiencing a precipitous decline. As you just said, investment is drying up, capital flight is accelerating, tourism is shrinking. So there is really an economic collapse, you could say. All of this add up to one important thing, that is the legitimacy crisis. Because a government that doesn't have a semblance of authority, semblance of legitimacy, cannot last long. This government, at least the last gambit was that they have a developmental state that would do well with the economy in exchange for loyalty from the people. If the economy is crumbling, that loyalty is going to be withering away. So really, it's a very difficult situation that they are in, and that is really what is making them admit it, but transparently analyze it. But I still want to follow on what you just said for Jawar. What is it that makes them so honest about this? What is the situation? What is the level of the situation? And what do they intend? And that's really what I want to, before we move on to another topic.
I think that's an important issue. Why are they so candid? And why are they insisting on security solutions? Have the political solution been tested? Have they failed? I think these are things that, their conclusion is the political solution have failed, or there is no conducive condition for political solution, therefore we have to restore security. Why are they doing? I think there are two interest groups working on this. One is TPLF. TPLF has been in serious trouble since Mallas's departure. They, as Rene said, the guy left, he took their passport and left. And they have not been able to find an ideologue, a commander, a leader. There are a number of rival factions among them. Therefore, they are not able to respond to changing conditions. They have not been able to respond to the dynamics outside EPRDF and inside EPRDF itself. So I think the security understands, even the TPLFites, the political as well as the military, which is actually hard sometimes to distinguish, they understand that they have been beaten in the political game. They have been defeated in the political sphere. They have no political cohesiveness. The political party is in crisis. The only thing that has some semblance of cohesiveness is the military. So they want to take TPLF's supremacy, to TPLF's domination. There is no longer TPLF domination in the political arena. So they want to restore it using the security means. But there is a second and really important issue. Who are proposing this? This is a document prepared by the military intelligence chief, by General Gabredilla, of course with the blessing of Samora. Who is General Gabredilla? And the other chief of operations, General Quarter. What is happening the 2-3 months prior to this document? The conflict in Somali region was squarely blamed on these military generals. That these military generals are involved in illegal, illicit trade, in the contraband trade. That it is them who are pushing the president of Somali regional state to invade Oromia regional state as a way of proxy war against the more assertive regional administration in Oromia. And the opinion has been quite vocal, and the population have been very explicit in saying, no, our war is not with Somali people. In fact, our war is not even with Somali regional state. This is a war waged by the generals. Their trade has been seriously disrupted. They have no longer control over the cat trade. They have no longer control over a number of, some of their contraband transportation inside the country has been threatened. They have been named and identified in internal meetings. Even the Prime Minister has hinted that federal authorities are involved in this conflict. So if you are a general in key position, and if you are implicated, you want to hide behind deteriorating security measures where you have an upper hand instead of the political and legal sphere where you can easily be caught. So there is a TPLF interest that's pushing this, and there is individual interest of individual military generals that is pushing this. So they're pushing this. And the second point is it true that the political solution have been attempted and failed? No. They said, let's start a deep reform. And Opinion took this serious. And they started undertaking, not full reform, but they started taking some small steps towards reforming. They started liberalizing the political sphere. They started answering some of the demands of the population, for example, related to land. They started seizing some land that were illegally acquired, that were underutilized, underdeveloped. They started disrupting some of the contraband trades. Of course, this starts to affect the interest of the dominant groups. Later we can discuss. In fact, Opidio's limited experiment showed that the political solution is feasible, possible, and it works. And the argument in this document that political solutions have not worked is just not true, because only Opidio, to some extent, tried to engage the population in political sphere, try to undertake some limited reform. TPLF hasn't done that inside Tigray region. They haven't done it at the federal level. In fact, the federal authorities, the federal security establishment have been hindering these political reforms that we are observing in Oromo and Amhara regions elsewhere. So it's not true that political reform or political solution have sought and failed. It is the fact that they do not want political reform. In fact, they are threatened by the very limited, small political reforms in Oromo and Amhara region that they want to curb. They want to reverse those political reforms. They want to tighten the political sphere that has been a little bit liberalized in Oromo. That's why they want to go back to the security sphere, the security sector, use the security forces to clamp down not only on the population, but also, they repeat again and again that there are these internal enemies, that these officials who are conspiring with this and with that, and with what Haile Mariam has been saying here and there. They want to use security, the claim of the deteriorating security situation to go after reformists, even inside the political organization, I think.
Well, that's really important, and I just want to say a couple of things, and then we'll move on. So what we are saying here is it's not even an honest assessment. It is true what has happening is true, but the motive for this is not to try to come to grips with reality, but other things. So what you said is that, number one, they were trying to create a crisis situation that would justify some kind of military intervention. And the military is where the ruling or the core of the system, the TPLF, seems to have some kind of command and control structure, if not the entire structure of the military. At least they believe that. So occasion a situation where that would be justified some kind of constitutionally, that the constitutional order is threatened, and that requires a restoration of order. They've been doing a number of things, as you just listed. One is the organizing of public protests, and then planting their own agent provocateurs to incite from within the system, like planting an illegal flag, as you just said, at Tsegeye. They have done a number of things to instigate inter-regional state conflict, like between Oromo and Somalia, which means, while the regional states are not really functioning as they should, this justifies the federal government to intervene. Or instigate an intercommunal conflict, like between the Oromo and Somali, or Oromo and Amhara. Well, that would also create a situation where the federal government, which means the military, would intervene legally or constitutionally. So they have been preparing to occasion a constitutional way of doing something that is unconstitutional. that is the military takeover. Fine. On the other hand, what you just said, what Jawar just said, is that there was a deep reform that they proposed 2 years ago. There was a deep reform that they proposed about 6 months ago. Either one affected, actually what it resulted in is actually the seeping of authority from the center to the regions, where people like Lama, Magarsa, or the Gaddu and Argacho were getting the attention of the people, that they were really looking like the people were responding to what they're saying. So power, without their knowledge, was going from the center to the regions, which the people applauded. They had to find a way to arrest this. And one way is to say, let's do the last ditch attempt. That is, all of these things that we just said didn't work. What will work is to reestablish the National Security Council, in which they would have a say, in which they would have a majority vote. So that is really interesting. What they've been doing is to try to, without repeating myself, to give some constitutional governor to an unconstitutional act. That's the military takeover. Well, you have already started hinting at it. Is it going to work if they did that? Is it likely to work? Is it likely to do what you just said, Tsegeye, the sequence of steps that you just said? You do this, and then, I mean, like 8 steps that you talked about after occasioning a military takeover. Is it likely to work, even that?
Obviously, it is not. Just before that, I react to that question, though. The way they descriptively, it is more or less accurate. The situation analysis is descriptively more or less accurate. This is a very secretive regime, traditionally. But unprecedentedly now, they are very transparent about the situation. Why is this the case? And very interestingly, it is not the first time that political institutions has never worked in Ethiopia. It's not the first time that rule of law has been defied in Ethiopia. It's not the first time that the constitutional order has been put under threat, primarily by its own officials. It's not the first time that corruption or illegality, etc., has happened in that country. Now they are talking in the name of breakdown of law and order, threat to the constitutional system, administratively crippled institutions, corrupt officials, and so on and so forth, to say politics has reached the end of the road. Why do they say this? Because they have lost control over the politics now. TPLF has lost control over the politics now. TPLF cannot anymore serve as the core of EPRDF that directs things, conducts the political orchestra in the country as it used to do. So what way can it go back to the system? They have to say, look, the problem is politicians. Therefore, we need another alternative. So that another alternative is the security thing. Look, just before this national security plan was announced, as you indicated, there were attempts to create contrived protest demonstrations here and there. There were attempts to create contrived communal violence, and they called them ethnic violence here, ethnic violence there. And now the document actually talks about genocide. For many years, when activists, ourselves among many, when we talked about genocide, they were in complete denial. For the first time, they're talking about genocide. And they were trying to say there is genocide, and they wanted to do, to create a situation where they can have an emergency, state of emergency declared in the country. That didn't work. Border wars have been contrived. That didn't work. It was somehow arrested by the more or less pragmatic, wise leadership which tried to control the conflict, not to go outside of their hands. Now, when that happened, all legal avenues to come to the control of the EPRDF machine through state of emergency through federal intervention. They even called for federal intervention at some point, including their propaganda machine, the media. We're talking about the need for direct, uninvited intervention of the federal government, especially in Oromia. And when all legal avenues for intervention or declaration of state of emergency could not work, the only way to come into this is basically the military is saying the politicians are not astute enough, they are not wise enough to handle this matter. We are going to do something. We cannot anymore mobilize the parliament to declare a state of emergency because the speaker just resigned. And as you have seen in one of the meetings after his resignation, the parliament was more or less, half of the OPDO wasn't there. It was boycotted, literally. They know that the parliament is not going to be cooperating with them if they come up with a declaration of emergency plan. And to make things worse, OPDO and ANDM are trying to create this semblance of solidarity, which means that solidarity, if it plays out in parliament, they are going to actually change the government virtually. They are not only to object to the plans, but they are going to maybe move the motion that there needs to be a government change. When this is threatening, now, by putting the blame on the political leadership, by saying, look, you guys have not done enough, now they resuscitated an oft neglected institution which only has advisory role legally, which is the National Security Council. The National Security Council assesses the security situation in the country and gives advice to the politicians for them to act. That's what it does. Whether it is external security threat, internal security threats, they analyze this and they put out proposals for the government to act. And they never act by themselves. This time, however, the National Security Council came up with its own plan and blamed the government without making mention of names. Now, it talks about the political leadership is the problem. But then which political leadership? Is it the prime minister? Is it the regional presidents? Is it who? Which political party? It doesn't say anything about that. So that is the way. Why are they doing this? They are basically, this is a usual trick, by the way. All authoritarian and even imperial regimes, what they do whenever they want to intervene as the Messiah to come is they describe lack, some kind of absence, especially rule of law, peace, security, order, useless economy, etc., dysfunctional economy. These are the kind of excuses always used to portray a situation of crisis so that they can come in. Now, this time, what is unique is that the military and the intelligence sector is the only one that is being active. Now, it has never been active so far. The National Security Council was legally established in 2001, and I know it has had a meeting on different occasions, and we never knew that the Security Council plan has, Security Council had advised the Prime Minister on this and this, and he has therefore acted in this and this manner. Then we never heard that. But now suddenly, in the absence of the official institutions, these people are coming out from nowhere and saying, this is the plan, this is how we organize ourselves, this is the timeline, and this is how we do it. And very interestingly, the command post structure they have even established has even the regional command post structure, a very interesting category there. If you have seen it, it talks about the federal representatives from the federal police in the region, representative from the federal security intelligence in the region, representatives. That's what it says. And representatives from the regions, representatives of the federal army in the regions. What federal army is in the region? What federal security intelligence is in the regions? You know, and then they talk about regional police, regional militia, etc., to come together and work. So even within the state command post structure, there is a lot of federal element in there, and this is very, very intriguing, really. In other words, what is happening is a military or intelligence sector takeover over politics. And will this work is now the question, and that's the question you ask. Obviously, it doesn't. Why doesn't it work? What will happen is, yes, the military, the command post structure will go in, The military will be deployed around highways, roads, interstate roads, and so on and so forth. It talks about securing the external borders, securing the trade lines, securing the freedom of movement of people. I mean, it's important to ask what people, which people are moving, and what kind of movement is curtailed really? What kind of movement is it that is curtailed? You should ask this kind of questions. Whose movement are they talking about? Is it Oromos moving to elsewhere, or is it others moving to Oromia? Is it commodities moving from Oromia to elsewhere, or is it commodities moving from outside to Oromia? Obviously, there is one direction that they are trying to target. Anyway, they will mobilize these things. They will mobilize the army to patrol these areas. Okay. And they ban demonstrations, protest demonstrations. Fine. What would that bring about? It will bring about a truce, a temporary state of quiet. Not necessarily peace, not necessarily absence of resistance, but a truce and temporary quiet. Which means, you see, an imposed peace is always an imperial peace. An imposed peace, therefore, is violence in another form. So it is a simmering violence, and while that simmering violence happens, the TPLF, as I said, regroups, does what it does best, the usual thing. Sits in a meeting, closed door meetings, evaluations after evaluations, very strategic use of useful political tools to purge the unwanted elements and to even bring before courts through the Anti-Corruption Commission, etc., bring them to trial and arrest the whole protest thing, and then by regrouping themselves, reform the government, meaning new people will be appointed and old irritants will be removed, and that way they will come back to have a grip over the politics that they have lost control of. Now, the undermining of the political institutions has always been there. I mean, the parliament is always a rubber stamp parliament. It was always used to do things that TPLF wants. Why are they so not wanting to go into it now? Because there are 2-3 things happening. The ANDM and the OPDO are in the process of reinventing themselves as populist political parties. Why is this happening? Because the Oromo protest enabled the political parties to assert themselves more. 2, these parties did not just say no to TPLF suzerainty as such. They also said, we're not alone, we can hold hands. And that holding hands means the parliament cannot be used as a rubber stamp parliament anymore. So the TPLF has to find a way to work around this. Now, I do not think the purging, all these things will not work, because there are only 2 years now for the next election. 2 years of crisis, and maybe they will either postpone the election or they will just go into a very powerful explosion of protest and basically face their end in that kind of upheaval. So that I think is my take. Absolutely, it is not going to work.
Yeah, I want you to speak to that even more, Jawar. But let me kind of to generalize what we're saying. There is the political system, which is really built around the party, and as you said earlier, around one man, has started to fragment. That's a reality. The administrative system has always been undermined, and it cannot be used now for expediency that you have not used before. The economy is in downward spiral. So, see, as the philosopher Andre Malraux said, the best way to live an exciting life is to tell big lies and then live your life to make them come true. But there is an end to philosophizing, and reality has a way to intrude. So the reality has intruded on them. They had to assess it this way. And their proposition is to resolve a multi-dimensional crisis is to resort to violence or the deployment of the security apparatus of the state. The political system is paralyzed. How is it going to work? And I really want you to focus on that alone, and in conjunction with this idea that in the process of the reform that they instigated, power had already devolved into the regional areas of ANDM and OPDO. In that relation, I want you to speak to that idea of that this is not going to work or going to work.
Look, as a guy was saying earlier, the whole process they are going about, they knew that they are defeated politically. Defeated politically because they have not produced any new idea over the last since Mullah's died. They did not produce any commanding leader. And the rival factions themselves, they are not really competing over politics. They are not even competing over power. They are competing over wealth. They're busy competing over how to divide the loot. So in the political sphere, first they got defeated by the Oromo protest. They were outsmarted and outperformed. They underestimated Oromo protest from day one, and they did not respond to it strategically. They responded tactically to strategic problem. Instead of addressing the questions, for example, take the master plan issue. It erupts in 2014, and instead of sitting down and revising and reviewing and actually addressing the issue, the OPDO said, okay, let's hold it for now, and the process stopped. What's their response? Attack OPDO. You remember Nasgabachol and all that was advised. So their approach was, they really didn't understand the simmering problem. So they got defeated by the Oromo protest. What's the more glaring evidence than that? Their own admission that, for example, we repeatedly said their weakness is the economy. The one pillar of power that we have to target in order to induce, a lasting political crisis and to bring them down to their knees to go after the economy. While even robbing the countries, they didn't understand how vulnerable the economy is to omission or commission in Oromia. So now they admit that the economy is in crisis. Yet, and what's really surprising me is they are not even learning from their junior partners. The actions taken in Amhara region, in Oromia region, even if they are small, they had a calming effect. They are an appeasing effect. The people gave Lamma Magarsa and others chance. They gave them 6-9 months when they started, talking and initiating these small reforms. And instead of taking a coup from that, instead of taking some lesson from that and starting a nationwide federal level reform, they start to see even those ones as a threat. For example, this protest, the guy was talking about, the one they tried to instigate, in the way they were reporting, their medias were saying, these protests have to continue, they are constitutional rights. If OPDO tries to suppress it, it's an intervention, violation of human rights. A week later, they start crying about ethnic violence, massacre, and genocide. By the way, this document says genocide.
Yeah.
And government admitting that genocide has been committed by government forces against a people under that government. Okay? And on one side, you see them, using these alarming words and using their media to preach Armageddon is coming and so on and so on. But their solution still is not political. When it comes to the political stuff, and the other thing that annoys them, and I repeatedly argue that the Somali region, on one side, although it is part of these generals trying to protect their financial interests, it's also a long-term plan of the TPLF to instigate communal violence as a way of protecting their interest in the long term. Abai Zahaye and Suyum were talking about this last year. And particularly, the coming together of the Amhara and Oromo organizations. Mullahs used to be so irritated when the Oromo and Amhara elites, even in diaspora, talk to each other, right? Now, the very parties that were created to keep these two communities apart. Remember, OPDO and the Biade and OPDO and the Andam are created to keep these societies apart, because Biade or Andam was supposed to be a countermeasure for the chauvinist, which is the Amhara voices, the Amhara intelligentsia. OPDO is a countermeasure against the narrow nationalists, the Oromos. The very organization established to be instrument of divine rule started to play a unifying rule, bringing the two largest ethnic group, two largest political constituency together. So this really frightens them. It scares them. Had they had a rational mind, they would have seen this as an opportunity to open up the political space and create a safe exit for themselves, negotiate an exit. Instead, what do they want? They want to crush this opening, this experiment by Opidio and by Andrew. I think that their approach is not going to work. That's your question. I think it's not going to work for two reasons. One, at least in Oromia and also in Amhara region, the level of popular mobilization is so high. The level of consciousness is so high. The organizational capability of the civic society has increased. They couldn't they couldn't crush Cairo last year. Cairo this year is 10 times stronger than they used to be last year. If they couldn't crush them after Cairo engaged for almost a year of protest, after so much exhaustion, after so much losing so much of their organizers, now after they have reorganized, they have emerged as almost a parallel government in Oromia, they will not be able to control the population, one. Second, I don't think they will find the kind of personalities they are seeking in Biaden and Opidio. It will be very difficult to find another Mukhtar Kadir in Opidio. It will be very difficult. Because, let alone in the Oromia, in the Oromo population, that kind of person cannot survive inside Opidio itself. It will be difficult. Why? Because the political marketplace has changed. What sells in Opidio today is nationalism. What sells in Opidio today is assertiveness. Any crackdown, it probably will push them underground, but it will not make them surrender. It will not make... Remember, they really wanted to get rid of Geddu Andargacho from Amhara region. It was very open, they tried. But the party, rank and file, rallied around him and pushed aside those who are trying to push him out. So they can bring any military might. My fear is it might lead to further civil war, but the ability to regain the kind of control that TPLF had under Mallas, I don't think that's likely.
Well, this is interesting, and we'll move on to another question, which is the focus of this discussion today. But before that, let me kind of recapture what you just said. This is what you said, Jawar, about a kleptocratic state trying to protect the loot is what it is. It's not even a political act. That's very interesting. And I would say that it would not work for a number of reasons. Number one, as I was saying that power from the center, at least political power, Jawar also alluded to the fact that they were politically defeated by the protesters. That's important. But also power has gone away from the center. That's what I kept saying, that the regions are stronger, and they appear to be responding to the protest in a relatively honest way. They seem to be listening or even giving voice to the people. At least in the Oromia region, that what we see on OBS, they allow people to express their anger, express their demands, articulate their goals. There is change there. So power had already shifted a little bit from the center to the regions. So it's too late. It's coming too late, too little, whatever military solution that they are proposing. Number two, the determination, the sophistication of method, and the clarity of purpose that the activists in the country or the Oromo Cairo or other places are showing is incomparable to the old tactic of simply violence that the military is trying to propose. Look, there was a state of emergency that was imposed. Just after the state of emergency was imposed, it went back up to the pre-state of emergency situation. Violence didn't work. Why would it work this time? And finally, something about the military that we haven't said so far. It will not work. This is a military that was really reconstituted from the TPLF army. You have to remember that. But while the military commanders are ostensibly apolitical, that they have gone under the transformation of making a private army into a national defense force, the command structure is not apolitical. It remains highly politically connected. The second is that beyond the active and the retired military generals that you guys talked about in the East who are really involved in the economy and now protecting their loot, look, for them, it's not the country that is important. It is the loot. So they have no interest in the restoration of order. What they're interested in the restoration of their kleptocratic system. It's not going to be able structurally to address these issues. This business, the military is deeply involved in the business sector. The METEC, for instance, was created to ensure technology transfer, but it's involved in almost every sector of the economy, and it's been discredited in everything that it puts its hand to, because it's a system of loot. It's a kleptocracy in there as well. So they have no national interest. They have only private interest, even the generals in the military. How would the same military that is really protecting its own loot would be able to restore and maintain a semblance of authority? So and the other thing is that military, because they are so involved in the economy, they don't depend on the political system. They are independent of the political system because they have resources of their own, economically speaking. They also are mandated, or this METEC is mandated with manufacturing and supplying weapons to the defense forces, explosives, vehicles, ammunition, big guns, weapons, and personal weapons, including communication equipment. So it is independent. It's independent. It's going to do what it wants to do, not what the day demands. These are the reasons why I think that it is structurally incapable of living up to the demands of the people. Now, if that is the case, that this is a corrupt military by itself, it's a private army, so to speak. It controls only the command structure. It is politically highly connected, but doesn't care about politics. It is economically independent of the system, and it is heavily armed. That is the only thing that seems to be working in their favor. But the violence had not, as you kept saying, violence had not returned people home. It hadn't restored order. Now, what is the solution? What is the way forward if the last system, that is the military, if the last machine in the arsenal of the TPLF is unlikely to succeed, then what is the way out? What would be the protesters' demand? What would be the solution? I'll start with you, Tsegeye.
Well, the system has obviously decayed, and the decay is even worse in the military. And as you have just indicated, if the system was kleptocratic, I think the kleptocracy is mainly within the leadership in the military. And the politics has run out of governing narratives, has run out of ideas with which to handle anything. And the military, because of its being corrupt, its leadership in particular, has no appetite for politics, really, except for looting and making sure that the status quo is preserved. They know how to preserve, say, the status quo. That's how they are prepared, but they don't have any political vision. And if the system has decayed as such, and of course it has decayed only after destroying the organized civic and political institutions that could have been alternatives to, alternative agents of change, then one would hope that the reform that we hope for, the change that we hope for, may be coming from within EPRDF, within the structure. I think the solution to all these crises will be, in some ways they have already diagnosed the problem, but their solution, their proposal goes astray. And now, I think if it is true that there was a threat to the constitutional order, there is a breakdown of law and order, there is a breakdown of rule of law, and so on and so forth, then what you have to do is reinstate democracy. In fact, the document starts out by saying It's here in order to, because our development, the people's demand for development, good governance, and democracy have been set aside or neglected. So the key to going back to a normal situation, to normalizing it, is to keep an inclusive development, to bring about good governance. I don't like the phrase, but it's a cliche. And of course, restore democracy in that country. Now, we agree to that proposition, but that proposition works only if they really pay heed to the constitution on behalf of which they actually kill, on behalf of which they mobilize the military to suppress dissent, to suppress human rights, to suppress people's voices. So, as just yesterday, I wrote a long piece on the transformation from within that we will hope for. And I had a list of things that we expect to be done from within the system. Given the fact that political organizations that can speak for the people are either enfeebled and sent to prison, the leadership is in prison, or they are on exile, the only alternative agent of change will be from within the EPRDF framework. The only alternative solution from within that framework will be the constitutionalist solution. So I was thinking about how one can basically free the entire structure of EPRDF from TPLF domination first, as NDM and Opidio's alliance has already tried to do, which they practically have edged out TPLF from the game. So freeing EPRDF from TPLF, then freeing the democratic institutions such as the legislature from TPLF again, which gives them the opportunity to create a new government, which then helps to make a huge huge change across the board in the country. Because according to the constitution of the country, according to Article 56, the federal parliament is the supreme political authority. That parliament, as it is traditional in all parliamentary systems, is a sovereign parliament. That sovereign parliament can change a lot of things. So the first task of that parliament, in which NDM and Opidio's alliance becomes prominent, would be to repeal all the repressive laws and demilitarize the politics by pulling the army from the civilian life of the population, and resolve to go to the crisis areas to ensure that evicted, displaced people are restored, peace is restored, justice is brought back, and so on and so forth. Fourthly, they need to decide in parliament to release all political prisoners. I think that goes a long way to address the demands of the population as well. In the whole protest was about also having political leaders released from prison. Having done that, I think the real work of governance and governing compassionately begins. The real work of governance begins in the sense that they need to go into the economy and to kind of regulate it in such a way that they inject dynamism to the economy. So these are the kind of things that one would hope for. And of course, primarily depoliticizing the army is important. Somehow insulating the army from the politics, because they are not doing good anyway. They are not having any political vision, any meaningful political intervention in the whole process. They are actually a spoiler. The only thing they are good at is probably bringing some calm, impose some kind of imposed peace, which is not really peace, which is only violence. Apart from that, they don't have anything. So we need to keep them insulated. And perhaps for the first time, if Opidio and NDM get strong, for the first time in the last 26 years, the Ethiopian military is going to be depoliticized and the politics will be demilitarized. And that way, I think within the EPRDF system, there could be some ways of reform. Now, all this takes us back to the solution being political, and the political solution starts with responding to the political demands of the people in the course of the last 4 years. In the course of the last 4 years, there was prominently the Oromo protest, but there were also low-key protests in the Amhara region, in Konso, in different parts of the southern regions. Now, those protests have clearly articulated what the population demands, and those demands must be met. And in order to do that, it has fallen upon the Oromo protest, the organizers, the orchestrators of the Oromo protest, to do something about the whole regime. And it's very interesting, the Oromo protest has given birth to this new OPDO leadership, which somehow aligned itself quickly to the people and have started to use the populist rhetoric, talking about the demands of the population itself. And this group, very interestingly, in a very interesting gesture, is also reaching out to the ANDM and basically saying, look, I am the one that is hurt the most, but I will be magnanimous in operation, and I will forget about my demands. I will talk about your demands, and I will try to work towards a redeemed kind of geographic space in that region. The Oromo protest is also basically articulating for them that the solution to the way forward is based on basic values such as democracy, human rights, peace and harmony, and respect for diversity. For want of a better word, I would say multinationalism, or recognition of the co-equal and co-equal presence in that country. These are the basic values on which solidarity, a lasting solidarity, can be built, and these are the values for which we can struggle together, and very interestingly, in a very responsible way. This time the OPDO seems to be taking the lead in taking responsibility, not just for its own region, but also for the greater country. So that, I think, is going to be the solution. In one of the articles that I just was posting on Facebook, written by the two of you last week, I was seeing Donald Levin quoted, and Donald Levin once had said that the Oromo vision could electrify Ethiopia, and it looks like to be true. For many, many years, the Oromo, especially the OPDO, has not been taken as a very significant actor, but it's very interesting that the group that is most skeptically looked at to work for the betterment of Ethiopia is now the group that probably saves Ethiopia from itself.
Jawar, what do you think? What was the way forward?
I think what's not the way forward and what's the way forward. What should not be done and what should be done. What should not be done, and I want the TPLFites as well as some of their foreign backers to really pay attention. There is a push, there is a tendency, particularly among the West, whenever there is crisis, to run toward the gun, toward securitizing the issue. That doesn't work in Ethiopia. That shouldn't be done, because it's impossible to do it, and it will have very dangerous ramification. Why? Because Ethiopia doesn't have a national army. Trying to attempt the Egyptian model or the Zimbabwe model is not going to work, because there is no national army. The army is extremely divided. There is so much resentment due to ethnic domination of the command, and also because of the corruption. So you have a very divided, corrupted military. They have been trying to replace the chief of staff Samora for 3 years. The Tigray and the TPLF itself could not agree on replacement, because there are a number of rival generals who want to replace him, Saire, Gabridilla, Quartar, and so on, with their own supporters within the military, within the business community, within the political organizations. So any attempt to bring the generals to power is extremely dangerous, because they will not be able to control and restore peace and order. In fact, if they lose, and they will surely lose control of the situation, and the disintegration of the military is very likely that will result in serious conflict inside the country. So the military approach, militarization, is absolutely the wrong way to go about it. What should be done is, I think, as a continued liberalization of the political sphere. Two-track liberalization is important. Inside and outside, internal and external. Internal, I mean, the IHADEG, the EPRDF need to be liberalized. The domination of TPLF, that is weakening, and they really don't have domination because they are not able to control. They are not, the leaders emerging from OPDO and them are becoming dominant figures. They are becoming popular figures. So liberalizing inside the political party, reforming the military, particularly removing some of the dangerous generals who are involved in so many illegal businesses, bringing some level of representation with the military leadership, with an intelligence leadership. Also, allowing the federal institutions to function the way they are supposed to. We have seen when the parliament if you allow the parliament, the House of Federations, the regional assemblies start to function and allow them to, exercise, even if not fully, but even their limited power, then you will start to find internal solution. One is the internal approach. The external. This need to go simultaneously. The externally, they need to release the political opposition leaders. You cannot have stability in Oromia for sure, as long as people like Dr. Marana, Bakale, Olbana, and others are in jail. You cannot have peace in Amara region as long as the colonel, those colonels and military officials and the committee of Al-Qaeda are in jail. They need to start releasing the political prisoners, and they need to start sitting and discussing with them. Make peace inside the regime and start making peace with forces outside the regime, the opposition. If you do that, you can engage in accelerated reform. There are only, from now on, Ethiopia can only go forward. Going back is not going to be happening. From now on, the best case scenario is a transition to democracy through accelerated reform, through accelerated liberalization of the political sphere. That could take us to a democratic transition without destroying the current regime, without a revolution. But reform has already begun. The reforms, the reform-minded leaders in Amhara region, in Oromia region, have already begun liberalizing the political space. Once you reach this level, if you try to curb it back, you will not be able to do it. So a real reform leads to revolution. So that revolution is going to consume the regime and give birth to a new order. I think any peace-loving, any person who is interested in democratization would like to see orderly transition to democracy than an abrupt revolution. So what works for Ethiopia right now is a speedy, accelerated reform at all levels, at regional level, at federal level, inside the government, and with outside forces. If they can do that, they might be able, the Tigray and the TPLF elites might be able to protect some of their interests while giving up some of their undue influences and monopolies. Of course, they will not be able to continue with their monopolies, but they might be able to protect their interests. They might be able to contribute towards building a new political order where they and the rest of the country can achieve mutually beneficial outcome. But any attempt to resort to coercive means, to military, to restore domination, to protect monopoly of politics and wealth will definitely result in the third and dangerous outcome, which is probably disintegration of the system. So look, they really need to look what's been experimented inside Oromia, what's been experimented in Amhara region. They need, okay, we in the outside, we are extremists, chauvinists, and narrow nationalists, and so on and so on. They need to listen to guys who grew up under that system and who are telling them and showing them some of the possible ways forward. If they listen to them, if they talk to them, instead of labeling them collaborators of external enemies and so on, if they listen to them, it will be a solution. But resorting to, I think, coercive manner is going to be dangerous for them and dangerous for the country as well.
All right. So what the powers that be at the core of the Ethiopian system, what they're proposing, the securitization of the problem, is unlikely to work for all the reasons that we just said. I think, in my view, what they need to do is to take immediate steps to arrest this dispersal of authority. What I mean by that is, if the authority is not somewhere, and that's the problem, that there is really no one knows the seat of authority, for instance. An example of that is that when the political prisoners of the OFC were released by the court, or at least on bail, there is some other body that came and subverted that, scuttled that. Who that body is, you would not know, because it is flagrantly unconstitutional. So power, the seat of power is not known. The decision maker is not known. It is absolutely clear that the prime minister is not a decision maker. We knew that before, but right now it's absolutely visible for everybody to see that he has absolutely no authority. What that means is that this authority, decision-making authority, is dispersed into the regions, and if this is not corrected, what happens is that everybody feeling insecure would start to take power into their own hands. And you know the implications of that, where everybody is fighting for themselves. It would be a war of all against all. And that is a very undesirable situation. What Ethiopia needs right now is a peaceful transition to some kind of participatory democracy. That we all agree. That's what is needed. The trend right now, the trajectory is not that way. At least the core is not seeing this. The demands of the people must be met, because the demands of the people at this moment in time is not something that was created in the last 10 years. It is a question that we had for 100 years, that people must participate in their own governance. You can't put that genie back in the bottle anymore. It's impossible. So steps should be taken to arrest this dispersal of authority, dispersal of power, because the ultimate end of that is that everybody is feeling insecure, start to take matters into their own hands. So the potential benefits of this idea of arresting the dispersal of power is immense to address the current crisis, but also set the stage for the restoration of a democratic constitutional rule in the future. So what they should take is, this is important, Tsegeye, you have said it, to reinforce legitimate institutions. We know the elections did not produce the desired results, but the structure is there. That is to say, the parliament, the federal parliament, at least is a constitutional body, whoever is occupying the seats in parliament. So the parliament, as it has started to do, the federal parliament should start to collect that authority and reassert that it is the primary body of the representative of the people, not the executive, not the military, not the party. So like I said, this is good for today. It will stop the decline and the decay, but it's also bodes well for the future, that power is now returned to a legitimate authority. That authority must be reinforced. Re-establish authority, that is also important. That is, in that authority, the political parties or the representatives of the people should start discussing the ongoing crisis rather than denying it. And then reassure the public that they are taking measures to restore order. Now, this is important because in a symbolic sense, that this is not the party or the executive authority, the executive committee of the EPRDF that is debating, because parties are within the political society. They're not on the civil side. So this legitimate, whatever they are, the legitimate constitutional bodies should begin to reassert themselves in this regard, to stop this dispersal of authority, the end of it, which we would not really want to see. Now, why is that important? Again, this is important because there is a perception in the country, as I said, indicated before, that there is a private source of power behind the public institutions. The public institutions are a facade. But even within the party, there is what the Rene Raffort called the oligarchy. Jawar refers to them mostly as deep state. I think power should return from that deep state, and the oligarchy should be left alone, emasculated. So that is really important, so that we really render the parliament functional again to obviate the real dangers that the oligarchs are likely to pose, to protect their ill-gained power and privilege. So that is important, that the legislature should act as a true and only source of power to resolve the crisis today, but to also to show the way in the future. Now, who is going to do this? That is what you both talked about, is that some kind of alliance of the elected leaders, albeit that election was a sham. The elected leaders of the Oromo region and the Amhara region should start to take responsibility to lead the country towards an improved security system and a democratic order in the future. Not because this is what they want to do, but this is exactly what needs to be done if we are to have a country and a hope for a democratic constitutional state. Who's going to do it? So these two groups are important. Especially the OPDO can take credit for responding to the times. The OPDO, taking seriously this idea of reform or deep reform, they have visibly reformed themselves. New leaders have come to the top. I am not sure that the whole structure has been purged of the plutocrats or the kleptocrats that will still work from inside the OPDO to prevent reform from happening. That they should continue, but they have at least shown that new leaders who could listen to the people have come to power. Now, it's not only what they say. We love what Lama Magarsa, Abi, and others are saying. It's not only what they say, they have also done things to arrest the centralism of the EPRDF. That is to say, EPRDF says they believe in democratic centralism. What they practice is autocratic centralism. The OPDO have taken some steps, concrete steps, that would work against the EPRDF's mode of autocratic centralism. For instance, dealing with the opposition is important. The fact that they are allowing OFC to appear on the OBS media, the regional state-controlled media, and discuss visions is important. It needs to be encouraged. What they did with the Amhara region in Amhara is actually a profoundly important thing to reassure that there is a future where people could actually cooperate. This is a people-centered reform, and it should go from the bottom up to the center. So that is important. OPDO have taken responsibility. This is important. You have also said this. They've taken responsibility for the wrongs that had precipitated the crisis or the protest. Instead of blaming this ghost external forces, they said, we are the one. We are the ones that are not listening to the people and responding to the people's demands. That is important. For Abadullah Gamada to take the measure that he did, to say that where I sit is not really a seat of power, and because of that I resign that empty spot and would join the people to defend the honor of my people and my party, is a monumental step that they have taken. And this is concrete. This is not a theory. So, let me say one more thing. So, I have read what General Ababatak al-Haymanut had been writing. And I recommend that his writing, this is about the Chawla Rasibullah Taft, and the latest one is on Behera Saboch, Democratic Behera Saboch. I really recommend for the TPLF leaders to read what he is saying. Don't take it from me. Don't take it from Tsegeye. Don't take it from Jawar, because we're the opposition to you. Take it from him. He's telling you the honest truth. Read that and act accordingly. If not democratization, it is really disintegration. The Oromo protests and the Oromo regional government are showing the way. It's up to the oligarchs, the deep state, and the party, the TPLF, to take a good measure of what is going on and save themselves and save the country from total collapse. If you have anything to say, I'll give you the last chance to add to this, and we'll conclude. Jawar.
I think the Oromo alternative need to be tested. I think Oromos have provided the Ethiopian polity alternatives in two ways: at popular level and at the party level. At the popular level, over the last 3 years, the Oromos engaged. I mean, they induced the current political crisis and the possibility of change. Without Oromo protest, we wouldn't be talking about possibility of change today. But in doing that, in fighting for their right, they have brought a new model of struggle. They have popularized, non-violent way of achieving political aim. While dying in hundreds and thousands, they have proved to Ethiopia and the region and any observer that you can engage in civil resistance, you can weaken the regime while building your civilian capabilities. They have defeated the fear-mongering and phobia that made the Oromo struggle for a long time. The fear and the allegation that the Oromo struggle is about destroying Ethiopia, it's about dismembering the state, it's about displacing the various ethnicities who live in Ethiopia. The Oromos, while weakening the state authority, the state's grip over population, over cities, towns, and villages, they have proven that ethnic groups in different communities inside Oromia can live together, that they have nothing to fear. And also, I think Rene writes about this. I think you probably should bring him over. He reiterates, Oromia is maybe 70% youth, and this movement is fueled largely by young people. Young people around the world are prone to violence, but the youth in Oromia, the Kero, have resisted the temptation to engage in violence, even when the state acts in a way that motivates violence. This security document reveals that there is increasing supply of weapon and circulation of weapon inside the country, but we still see an absolute commitment to push a struggle non-violently, because it has also yielded results. So the Oromo mass and the youth have provided an alternative way of fighting for justice and democracy and exerting pressure towards transition. One. Second, and what Opidio has done, I mean, Opidio being part of this population and being pressured and forced in a way by the population, they have started, undertaking some very fascinating changes. For example, police in Ethiopia and Africa are known for their brutality. The conduct of Oromia police, which is praised by the Prime Minister itself, for first time in Ethiopia, they are tolerating protest. They have shown a non-violent way of containing widespread protest. And also the tone of reconciliation that you see from the regional leaders. Allowing inviting Nagaso to sit with them, allowing probably for first time in Ethiopian state history, except during the election, allowing the opposition, the OFC, to utilize, even if it's limited, even if it's one or two times, allowing that kind of dissenting voices on there. Not only that, allowing citizens in town hall meetings to condemn the government. They have shown that if you allowing citizens to speak up doesn't necessarily endanger a government. It only increases the level of tolerance. In fact, it increases its legitimacy. Opidio is part of EPRDF. It's part of the authoritarian system. But because of the kind of liberalizing the measures that have been taken over the last year or so, today we see some of their leaders celebrated as heroes, even if they are part of the authoritarian system. And I think the model followed by Oromo protest has emerged as an alternative for resistance, for other groups to resist. They have been embraced by consuls, Amaras, and elsewhere. And also, the model being embraced, by model being advanced, this controlled liberalization that the Opidio has been undertaking, should be adopted by the other organizations of EPRDF, most importantly by TPLF, because liberalization or opening of the political sphere doesn't necessarily mean a sudden death. It means an opportunity for transformation, an opportunity for to experiment with new models. The democratic centralism you are mentioning is dead. Abiotic democracy or revolution democracy is dead. It doesn't work. It doesn't resonate with people. People won't listen to all the same narrative that has been tested and tried over the last 26 years. You have to come up with new narrative. Where do you get new narrative? By opening up the political space so that new leaders, new ideas can come up from the mass of the population. You need to open up your political sphere for other kind of elites, for all kind of intelligentsia to come into the forefront and speak. When they speak, you can get ideas for change and transformation. I think this alternative that the Oromos are providing, the fact that, both in the resistance camp, in the opposition camp, in the ruling camp is something people should look at.
Dr. Tsegeye.
Yes, and 2 years ago, when the election 2015 was approaching, I wrote an opinion piece talking about how, just in the aftermath of the election actually, after the EPRDF declared that it has won 100% of the seats, I said the fact that they have done so and aged out all opposition political parties, while all this problem is building up and boiling up. I said it means all the problems are now fully embodied in EPRDF itself. And I actually suggested that maybe the explosive now comes from within. And it looks like that's what actually happened. Now, I am a big-time believer in redemptive constitutional practices about what has to be done in the immediate future. I think I will go back to that line again and say they need to animate the constitutional institutions. They talk about the problem of threat to the constitutional order. Then instead of securitizing the whole system, what needs to be done is to restore the constitutional order or to activate and animate it, which means the parliament must be operational, the authorities, the power must be asserted within that institution. It must really act like a sovereign representative of the people. Animating the constitutional system means also to animate and activate the dispute settlement institutions and the tribunals such as the House of Federation, the Constitutional Inquiry Council, and all the other moral agents, the conscience institutions of Human Rights Commission, such as Human Rights Commission, the Ombudsman Institution, Anti-Corruption, etc., etc. All the democratic institutions must be brought back to life, the judiciary and all those things. But more than that, I think what has to be done in very concrete terms is for the OPDO leadership in particular, but the OPDO and ANDM leadership, on whose shoulder now the government is going to come, must assure the public and the international friends of TPLF that they can offer leadership that might transit this country into a democracy. They should look inside and come up with leaders that can assure both the Ethiopian public and the international friends of EPRDF to take the country to the next step, to the next chapter. Second thing they have to do is that they have to do all sorts of negotiations at all levels, and all of those in good faith. Now, of course, these are politicians, and they fear for their own power. There is the anxiety associated with the loss of power. And sometimes their foes are very dangerous, and therefore they are kind of insecure. I understand that. But at the same time, they also need that to know that that this is not an end in itself. They have come into this position almost against their will, at least the OPDO officials. If that is the case, then let them finish the course by negotiating with the powers that be with good faith. What does that mean? Obviously, TPLF is what is the knot in all this game. TPLF cannot be just ignored. The oligarchy, the kleptocrats, etc., are TPLF, the political class of TPLF, and the business class of TPLF, and the military. Now, these people need to be somehow persuaded into conceding some of their parts. And so the OPDO, especially, but the two together, the NDM and OPDO, must show them somehow the reasons why some concessions are necessary. So that, I think, good faith negotiation is very, very important. And also in that regard, they should show some leadership, some kind of foresight, some kind of commitment to a bigger picture, a bigger transformation plan. Number 3, the international friends of the TPLF EPRDF regime, which have been the sponsors, the underwriters of this system for a long time, who have been giving democracy aid for a number of years in the form of building the capacity of democratic institutions and so on and so forth. They used to do what is called mediation between them and the opposition. Now that the opposition actually is eliminated from the scene and the opposition is being born from within, I think the international friends of TPLF, EPRDF need to get down, get dirty, and try to mediate between these leaders, because transition and negotiation and deal is easier. Deal is easier to reach in this system rather than between the system and other opposition political parties. So if they really care, often what they say is, we need to be careful about TPLF. There is this anxiety that that country might collapse. And of course, TPLF kind of plays that card out. Now, instead of being anxious about the country disintegrating unless they support TPLF, they need to convince TPLF to come to the table and start a good faith negotiation with OPDO and ANDM to kind of concede to a certain extent and begin to give it over to this democratic, at least majoritarian body that is in parliament at the moment. I think if these things are done, to a certain extent, some kind of smooth transition, peaceful transition might happen. And I mentioned that idea of EPRDF becoming the entire embodiment of the problems of Ethiopia that is going to implode. I go back to it because they need to see that this is imploding and they need to do the patching now within EPRDF itself. And I think this way they can probably transition the country. Back again to the OPDO, offer leadership, continue to address the people's demands, negotiating good faith, and promise leadership that can assure the Ethiopian public and the international community that this is going to go somewhere that they like, somewhere that their people like, somewhere that the Ethiopian public would like.
Yeah. There's one question that came related to what you were asking the ones the guy said. Can I comment on that one?
Sure.
I think because we talked about these internal issues, OPDO and then they're saying, so is it done? Is opposition politics done? Is the Kero and other things are done? Are you saying the Messiah now, OPDO and under? No, that's not what we are saying. Well, two factors. One, because of the popular mobilization, a popular movement, because of Oromo protest and Amhara resistance, they have induced changes within OPDO and Anden. And given that other oppositions have been weakened and destroyed by the regime, now these parties have the opportunity and historical responsibility to help the country transform itself into democracy. Particularly the bold moves by the OPDO leaders, their concrete actions and some of their promises need to be supported. They have to be held to their promises. However, even for these reformists within the system to succeed, the popular mobilization, the resistance need to be intensified. The Kero need to be built stronger and stronger. Their capacity and their strategy need to improve from time to time. The resistance need to be further intensified because Opidio's strength comes from 5,000 Keros, not from 5 million members. This reform within Opidio that you see, the power of Lamma or Abiy, it comes from the Kero, it comes from the opposition, from the resistance, not from the subservient elements or the mass members of the organization. So what we are proposing is, we're saying, and it's we are talking about a serious, complicated problem that those inside the regime has a role. As a guy has alluded to what Opidio and particularly Opidio has to do. They need to reach out not only to Andem like they are doing. They need to reach out to other parties, not only inside EPRDF, other regional parties within the Gambella, the Afar, and other parties, and strengthen, build the momentum for reform and liberalization. Also, they need to reach out and identify and reach out, the more reform-minded, if there are, within TPLF. They need to promote, they need to support them because they need them on board. They need, they need to build a liberal or a reformist bloc within the regime in order to the more hardliner conservative elements. For them to succeed, the outside struggle need to continue, and they need to be bold. But one thing needs to be clear to Opinios and others: they can't just appease. They have to deliver concrete actions, and it has to be an accelerated reform. They have to step up and work more and more. Again, I want to reiterate that the guarantee for success, the guarantee to protect the gains made so far by our movement, and the guarantee of pushing this movement to the finish line is not Opidio. It is not the regime. It is the case. It is the movement. It is our people. That's why we have to invest most of our time and our energy in mobilizing, organizing, agitating the mass through the Kero rather than putting our basket only in one part. Because if Oromo people are subdued, if Oromo people just come back and chill, Opidio will either pull back, either they will put their leg on the brake, or they can't withstand any clash, pushed back by the TPLF. I just wanted to say that because it was coming again and again on the comment section.
Yeah, that's very important. I'll say three things and then we will close it. We are analyzing the moment. We're looking at the moment and trying to think ahead. And we're not speaking to the OPDO in English. We're trying to address other interested parties that have no access to what's going on in the country in the written documents. So we're trying to speak to a different audience. Number two, we're not talking about the political dispensation that would happen later on. We're not really talking about the goal. What we're talking about is the transition. Because in Ethiopia, we have already experienced only violent transition. What we are saying is trying to provide counsel to the powers that be, saying that, look, you're faced with these two choices. How do you transition? Transition is going to be inevitable. So we're not talking about the dream or the political dispensation on the other side of the bridge. We're talking about the bridge right now and the role that OPDO could play. And in this, all we have said is, look at what the Oromo protest had done. Listen to what the Oromo people are saying. Listen to what the Amara people are saying. Listen to the people and address their demands. Because, as the Oromo say, which means if you refuse counsel, you're not going to afford to refuse a violent death. So we're trying to provide a counsel as we see it, not really enshrining OPDO as the ultimate destination of the Oromo protest. The Oromo protests remain the final, they have the final voice and say in what the politics and life they want to live. Well, thank you very much for that analysis. I think we'll need to do more speaking in Afan Oromo and in Amharic to really analyze the situation and speak as we see it. Thank you for your time, and our viewers for your time as well.
Thank you, Ezkeil.